Hello, Sparkly Beans. If you're new here, hi, my name is Avery, and I help justice-aligned, neurodivergent, and nerdy folks to cultivate ease and self-trust for growing into our emerging future. And one of the ways I do this is with the tarot, and y'all have been enjoying these kind of impromptu little tarot videos about my practice, so I want to keep doing those. Today, the topic is reversals. So I actually recorded a video on reversals some number of years ago, 3 or 4, and I will put that in the card above. And so if you want to know sort of most of my opinions on reversals have not changed from that video. So I talk in that video, for example, about how I don't think that reversals ever mean the opposite of the card and why that doesn't make sense. I also sort of like give out a list of a number of different ways you can read reversals. I'm not going to rehash what's in that video because it is still accurate, but I wanted to share some things that have changed or some things that I've learned from reading reversals for more than 5 years now. I think I have noticed that a lot of times folks will either they talk about having read reversals and then stopped reading reversals, but I haven't seen that many takes on sort of like how people's reversal approach has changed over a long period of time. And I wanted to just share some thoughts I have, and specifically I wanted to share how I've changed the way, very recently even, like changed the way that I think about what decks I read reversals with, and then the way that my approach to reversals can be kind of spread based, like how many reversals show up in the spread, as well as card based, in the sense of there are certain cards that I tend to read reversed a certain way, and then and just some general like thoughts about how I think tarot decks work with us when it comes to reversals. So as I said, don't ever consider reversal to just mean the opposite. If you did check out that video, you'll see that there's kind of a whole list of ways that I've learned from different sources to read reversals. But in practice, I would say it's narrowed down a fair bit over time, and it's card by card. The thing that actually inspired me to do this video is that I was reading with this deck. This is the Shadowlands. I'm not sure if there's an S, but it's definitely Shadowland, I think, tarot. And I was reading with this for my daily practice. If you're curious about my like weekly, daily sort of overlapping practice, I'm really excited about that. I just recorded a video that I'll put up in the card above. But for the dailies this week, I've been just starting to work with this for the first time, this deck. And I'm not sure how I feel about this deck yet. It's actually really funny. Lisa over at Supportive Tarot, I know a lot of folks get enabled by Lisa to buy decks. Well, Lisa in person enabled me at Newt's in 2020. Was like, oh my gosh, this deck, check out this deck. It's like, it's a shadow work deck, and like it's spoopy and it's great, and was like pointing it out, and I ended up, I was like, well, and then I bought it. Of course. It was in Portland. I had a whole thing when I moved across the country at the beginning of the pandemic. So it was actually, I left it still in Portland in a friend's house. So there was like a year before I even had the deck again, because I knew I'd be moving back to the West Coast. So I was like, yeah, just here, like take all the stuff I got at Newt's and I'll pick it back up. But because of the pandemic, it was a year before I even got back to Portland to her house, and then I just hadn't read with it yet. So I'm not sure about this. The funny thing is that Lisa actually decided that she didn't personally like it, keep it. But this deck made me realize something about reversals and how I decide which decks I read reversed. So what I had been doing is that most of the time I was reading reverse. So in other words, I would flip, as I was shuffling for the first time, I'd flip. The way I do it is I just go shuffle, 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 flip half, shuffle, 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 flip half. So if you're ever wondering, like, how do I get reverse cards in a deck if I want them there? It's one way to do it. That's pretty easy. You can also do what I call the 5-year-old shuffle method of throw them all on the floor and like mix them up like this. that works. And yeah, so just you want to make sure that you do a pretty good shuffle before the first flip, or else you'll have like all of the cards in this one suit flipped kind of thing. So do it a few times. But I would do that with most of my decks, and the exceptions, there honestly weren't that many exceptions. When I first started doing it, one thing that I would do is I would look at the backs to decide whether, and sometimes I'd look at the guidebook as well, to determine whether I thought that the creator of the deck intended, so very early on I would do this, whether I thought they intended reversals in the deck. So if the backs were not fully reversible, in other words, if they don't look exactly the same, in this case they do, right? But if the backs were like a design that is asymmetrical, then I would think, oh, I don't think this was intended to be used reversed. Or I would look at the guidebook and be like, well, if reversals are not mentioned, maybe that's not meant to be. And I do still think that, you know, creators' intentions in general with the art, with the deck, are important to reading. I'm going to do a video coming up actually about that. Nonetheless, I haven't done that as much, and I sort of found that intuitively the way I work with the decks doesn't always correlate, and that also because I so often don't like the reverse meanings. When reverse meanings are explicitly stated in the guidebook, they often are like really dark, really like shadow side of the card. Sometimes they are the opposite, and it just doesn't line up with the way I view reversals. And so like whether they were in the guidebook or not is really not something I pay attention to. And the backs, like, I might. But what I realized with this particular deck is I was using it with reversals, and it just wasn't like, I pulled all reversed, all 3 of the cards reversed the other day for my daily, and I was kind of looking at them and I was like, well, because of this art style, so it's really detailed and sketchy, you can see, right? There's a lot of detail. There's a lot of like fine line work. And it's not to say that you couldn't get specific meaning, for example, out of that, but I realize that with a deck, like, that's not, like, that example, like, yeah, maybe I would. But on the whole, oh, this was one that I got like that. So, I mean, and it's funny, I like almost want to change my mind now that I'm seeing this in the view screen. Like, yeah, in this case, I guess, like, you know, a hand, like the fire pouring out of the hand is an interesting idea. But there was something when I was looking at these, when I was actually using the deck. Did I put that in? I'll put that in the right side up. When I was actually using the deck, that I really didn't want them upside down. So that's one thing that I think I'm going to consider going forward. Maybe I'll update you and let you know how it goes, since I clearly changed my mind just now going, oh wait. But like, I think when it's really line work, when it's really fine detail, another example might be like if you have this Shadowscapes tarot, that one's like very like finicky, not in a bad way, but just finicky in the sense of like there's lots of little lines, that it might be harder to like derive meaning, especially if there aren't kind of like big shapes or like directional dynamic kind of energy in the card, that visually I wasn't pulling as much out of it. And that I say that like that's important because I've noticed that more and more the visual of the reversal is how I read. And so I have some examples. Actually, I'm going to grab this one. I didn't pull it out, but I just realized in my head. This is the Lilifer that I've shown on this channel. You know, I'm freaking in love with. I use a lot. The decks that I find work really well for reversals often are those that do have a lot of, what's a good example? A lot of, well, some of these are actually like round, right? So either way, it's a similar. But if there are a lot of like big flowing shapes, you know, basic-ish, like shapes, if there's a lot of dynamic direction or stillness, you know, what does it mean if this person is upside down and the water is like that? What does it mean if, oh, here's a good one. Like, to me, this upright, 8 of Pentacles, and then that. Right now that the hands are up, or are the hands down? So this is a great example. I kind of accidentally showed one in the one that I said I wasn't reading reversals, but if you have hands like this and that, both have meaning to me, but it's different. You know, this da versus da. And so also decks that tend to have like a lot of like duality in the imagery, like if they split the image, if there's like an underworld and an above, it's really interesting. Like, what does your intuition say when the underworld is on top? So example of that, maybe, I think there are some cards in here that are like that. So this is the Lubanko. So that was the Lillifer Tarot. This is the Lubanko Tarot. So this is one where that dynamic, I said something about like a dynamic or like a lot of moving energy. So when, let's find some good examples. Like, oh, this is, yeah, like da versus da. So even just something as simple as like the way that the cups are turned, who's upside down and who's right side up, you know, is this spark going up or down? And here's a good example of like, if you're reading in a spread that has more than one row, so there can be cards above or below each other, that's a way in which I love the way reversals, you know, interact with each other. And I often don't necessarily, yeah, I might read the meaning of the reverse card, but I might also, sometimes I won't even think of the meaning as different. I'll just be like, oh, it's very clear why that's reversed, because it's communicating with another card. So if I got that, for example, with something else below it, then I might say, oh, this figure is sparking. This is Page of Wands, I think. Yeah, Page of Wands. The Page of Wands spark is creating whatever's below it. So that might not necessarily be about the quote unquote, oh, here's, like, this would be very different for me, like this. Now look at that. Yeah, so like, that's a really interesting, because it makes the figure look like they're almost like crawling and the sticks are levitating, right? So again, I might still consider the meaning of the reversal, but just as is, I like check like this full reversed, you know, but I might also be like, huh, what does that imagery show me? You know, if this hang, often the hanged, or I like to call it suspension, is one that will look very different upside down. So like head water, but then like, what is that? So that's like one way to consider thinking about like what decks in your collection, if you have more than one deck, might kind of lend themselves a little more, and then thinking about spread positions as a way to visually interpret. Sometimes it's not even up and down, sometimes it's side to side. Like, even if you don't have rows, if you have columns, sometimes turning it upside down, it means that energy is going to the left or to the right. And so the interaction between cards, it can look like someone is handing something to someone else. Somebody is riding a horse towards another card. Somebody is, water is flowing in this direction. This is just another example of a deck that works well, I think, for reversals, actually really well. Like, I would never read this without reversals. So this is the Wanderers. So for example, there's the Lovers flipped. Like, that feels very different from that to me. This was the one that I immediately thought of when I thought of, like, okay, Chariot. Yeah. So there's that image, heart on top there. Now look what it looks like when you flip it, at least to me. Looks like a house. Now, it might not look like a house to you, but like, to me, it's suddenly a house, which I wouldn't have seen the other way around. The only thing about the Wanderers that I find sometimes a little challenging is although I don't know if this is intentional, it might be. Is that reversed? Or is that reversed? Because it's Roman numerals. So that's 2. Is what? But they look pretty much the same. Oh, this one actually, no, they look exactly. Oh, this is clearly intentional. This is exactly the same. But there's other examples in here, I think. Unless I just realized that they're all intentional and that I should have noticed that, but I'm pretty sure. Oh, here's a good one, like that versus that. Right, like if I see this, I almost see like, this is the 3 of Pentacles. I almost see it looks to me like some sort of like projections in the sky or something, like they're creating or like channeling the 3rd pentacle. Versus with this, I really see like connection to the earth and connection to underground. So I'm trying to find another like example of that one little thing. So this is a pip deck, and I think sometimes reversals can work really well with pip decks specifically because they, of course, I'm not finding it when I want to find it, but or here we go, like that going up versus that. With here we go. Maybe I really am realizing that all the ones that are like this are meant to be exactly the same, but I think it actually maybe they're meant to be exactly the same, and the reason why that was annoying me is because if I was trying to read the reversal like using just a particular technique and not visual, then I wouldn't know whether it was reversed or not. But maybe that's honestly just a clue that like with this deck, it's better to just read entirely visually, which wouldn't surprise me honestly because this is a very visual deck. But so yeah, that's just a note that when you have Roman numerals, it means that like a 2, a 3, a 4, no, a 2, a 2, a 1, a 2, a 3 would look the same flipped. A 10 would look the same flipped as well. So anyway, and then there are, of course, square and round decks as well. So round decks are all over the place. Square deck, Ren McMurdo in particular. I have 2 Ren McMurdo decks, tends to do square decks, and so there's 4 ways to read them. And Ren has some recommendations for how you can do that elementally with the moon phases, but these, and I'm just going to show a couple from this deck, and then continue, but you know, these are pretty detailed, so by the other quote-unquote rule of thumb that I gave, I might not think of it that way. Like, think of this as a good candidate for reversal. They are very detailed, but it's very clear, I think, that, you know, because this is meant to be a deck that turns different ways, that the cards tend to have an energy where, oh, here's a good example of the Tower, like tend to have an energy where, like, what is that tree falling on in the spread? Or is it like that? Is interesting, yeah. So with a square deck, you can do a grid spread, and then I always find with Ren's decks that you can be like, oh, the energy goes do 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 do. So you can kind of like trace the path of the energy, or is the energy kind of like setting up? You know, sometimes it feels like all the cards are flowing out, like away from the center or in towards the center. Sometimes it feels like there's a particular trail going through the grid, and so you can be like, oh, maybe that's the key message, and then the other cards are related to it. It pulls in, when you read visually, so many different options for how to see it. Another thing that I often do with spreads that I've mentioned before is, especially if it's a 3-card spread, this comes up a lot. If I have 1 card of reversed or 1 card upright, so in other words, if everything else is a particular direction and then there's 1 card, I tend to, and I'd probably do this too if I had like 7 cards and 2 were upright or something. If there's a big difference in the ratio is skewed, then I would tend to read whichever card or cards is in the minority direction. I would read that as highlighted or central, or like the other cards are expanding upon that maybe. that that card is the kind of key card, and the others are commentary on that card, or the others are opposing that energy. I do that a lot, and I found that works really well. In fact, my Pacific Northwest Tarot almost always communicates with me that way. I pull 3 cards with it. I pretty much exclusively pull 3 cards with it. In fact, recently I got 3 upright, and I was like, does it just not want to talk? Like, was that on what? Because that literally never happened. Like, weirdly, never happened. Well, not weirdly. I just think that's how I use it to communicate with the land. I think the land just for some reason communicates with me that way, and that's beautiful. But it was very shocking when I didn't do it. But yeah, so it doesn't really matter in those 3 what position for me. I don't tend to like pay that much attention to what position is upright or reversed, but just that is the central. Although actually no, that's a lie. With that deck I do. I don't always with that deck I tend to notice that if it's in the center of 3, it's often like these are the 2 kind of like opposing. It feels like a scales. Like this is the central theme, and then like these are the options, or sometimes like this is the central theme and these are the 2 branches, or these are the 2 things contributing to it. Whereas if I get 1 and then 2, 3 are the same, it tends to be more, or the other way around. Although I usually get the left card is the one that's different. In that case, it's often the 2 are more similar to each other, if that makes sense. So like, here's the theme, and these together are exploring that theme. Or maybe these together are contrasting that theme, but they tend to go together, whereas if they're on either side, they tend to be separate. That's just what I've noticed. So that's another thing to keep in mind, is that it might not be so much that these are just various ways in which it might not be that the reversed meaning is the most important part. It might be that it is the ratio, or that it is the visual. And that's worth considering. That's also, you could exclusively read reversals that way. Like, I think that is maybe an easier way, especially if you're scared of reversals, especially if you're new to reversals. That might be an easier way to just start with them or to play with them, is to not assign that like, oh, a reversal is more complicated or scarier or weird or whatever, and just to consider it like, oh, this is a visual cue. Now, I do also read reversals with meanings, and again, like, you can check out that previous video because I'm not going to go too much into that right here, but I will briefly say that one thing I have noticed is that although I have all these different ways to read reversal, so it could be, referring back to the energy of the previous card in the sort of standard tarot sequence, it could be like a sense of not readiness, it could be a sense of complexity, it could be a sense of, I mentioned in the other video that sometimes can be confusing, that a reversal can mean too much of an energy and can mean too little of an energy. I haven't found for me that like too much of an energy or that excess so much is something that I tend to turn to, although it might be in the sense of the kind of like shadow side of the card. And the shadow side of the card is also not something that I often use reversals for, because I find that, for me at least, if the shadow side of the card is what's indicated, I can tell that more based on either what's around it or based on my own energy about the card. So it doesn't need to be reversed for me to go, oh, shadow. And that's another thing that I dislike sometimes about guidebooks, is that it'll like, or not even guidebooks themselves, but just I think sometimes it'll be like, here's the light side and here's the shadow side of the card, and sometimes I think folks think like, oh, shadow equals reversal, and you could read it that way, but that's just not how I read. If I get a card, for example, that's upright and then is surrounded by more like negative or critical messages, not that any one card is negative, but if certain cards come together, I might be like, oh, there's like a lot here, then I might say, oh, I think that's pointing to the shadow of this card. Anyway, point being, like, I don't do excess a lot, but I may occasionally. It's more like when I see it reversed, I tend to think, especially if there's not an obvious visual meaning that I've just discussed, it's really like a poke, like a think about your relationship right now to this energy. So actually, I think in a lot of ways, even though I do use a few of the specific possibilities, so things like it's delayed, things like it's indicating that I'm having a reaction to this, things like I have resistance to this energy, things like this energy is actually flowing away or concluding, things like I am stuck in this energy, any of those will come out of my just asking the question, what is it about this card that needed to poke me a little extra? What is, I think when I see a reversal, I will first be like, okay, what is my reaction to this card showing up in the spread? How have I been relating to this energy lately? And this is the card-based piece of it, is that some cards, and it's very personal, but some cards, you'll immediately be like, oh yeah, well I hate that card. I have a lot of resistance to that card. I haven't been embodying this energy. And when that happens, I'm like, yeah, okay. The deck is just going, yo, no, really, no, I mean it. Or it might be, if you keep getting, sometimes I keep getting a repeater, and either way, it shows up a lot reversed and then it flips, or it shows up a lot upright and then it flips. And when it shows up a lot upright and then it flips, I think often it's like, hey, you haven't been noticing me. Like, or it can even be like, the way you've been interpreting me, maybe not what I was trying to say. Like, hi, like I kind of read the reversal as that, as like helping me to see like, oh, there's something more I haven't been considering. If it's been reversed a lot and I've been working with that energy and embodying that energy more, and I'm like feeling movement there, then I think often the upright coming up can say like, you're on the right track, hey, like acknowledging that this is coming through for you. There are certain cards that, and this is Lindsay Mack, my primary tarot teacher, I think does this as well. There are certain cards specifically that I just tend to be more likely to read as a kind of, this is releasing, this is flowing out. So like if I get suspension or the hanged card reversed, that can mean, though not always, that can mean that I'm moving out of that energy, but I'm really careful to like check in and be like, if I feel more like I've been resisting, then that's why it's upright. But if I feel like I've really been in a state of pause, in a state of sitting with the discomfort of being still, then often that card is moving out of that. Five of Cups, if I've been really like in my emotions and feeling my emotions, then sometimes a reversed Five of Cups can be like, okay, the tears are flowing away, we're getting out of that energy. There's some others like that, Ten of Wands. Just a lot of the more sort of negative cards, even though I don't view them that way, can come like that to me. But again, if I just ask myself, I often be like, oh yeah, I'm stuck there, I don't, and then if nothing comes up really immediately energetically, that's when I'm often will dig into like, well, is it maybe pointing to just an unusual or unique or rebellious or interesting take on the card? So that's my thoughts on reversals, and I hope y'all are having a great weekend, and we'll see you soon.